You saw the news, you read the news articles, people were going into the hospital, they were in there for 2 weeks, then they were passing away. Then we were picking them up. So their family, they've left, the family have probably seen them last when they've gone in an ambulance, or they've taken them and dropped them off. So every single person was my family member. It was my team's family member. It was the volunteers' family member. There was nobody on there who was just a name on a piece of paper. They became our family. That's why, if at times we were very protective over them, or if we did even more so, I'm not sure how it's possible, because we always defend the integrity and the dignity of the deceased at GLM, alhamdulillah. But even more so here, it meant even more because their family hadn't been with them. So now we would treat them exactly like they're our family. So dignity, integrity, honor, that's all that mattered.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So Omar, when lockdown occurred, what did you and your team do?
Initially when it occurred, we started looking at ways of improving the building. So our ideas and thoughts for lockdown would be, how do we get the site back up into tact? It takes a bit of a beating throughout the year. Leaking roofs, damaged walls. That was our initial thoughts, and our initial plans were based around what can we do to fix it up before it reopens, get it nice and ready for, inshallah, when the congregation can come back in. Lo and behold, like a lot of people's plans were thrown out of sync, ours were too, when we started looking at what the projected fatalities would be through COVID-19. And from there, it just took off at a pace. We put together a management team. The management team was 6 individuals from Green Lane, from Central, and there was 3 individuals who were partial, not related to either organisation. From there, we started looking at what things we'd need to put into place to deal with the pandemic. Alhamdulillah, we were very quick out the blocks. So we were able to put an infrastructure in place in terms of PPE, stock, coffins, a volunteer corps, which when we first started the group attracted about 150 individuals, and then we whittled it down to probably the most serious 40, 50. And that was it. We literally just dealt with funerals. The first 3 weeks after the masjid closed and we went into lockdown, we dealt with a lot. We dealt with a lot of the deceased bodies.
So I think when all of this was occurring, there was a lot of misinformation going around. There was a lot of confusion. A lot of Muslims were concerned. There was even talk of cremation. How did your team deal with all of this? And also, more importantly, what was the driver behind it? What was your main focal point as a team?
Exactly what you said. The first thing that came out that I remember us hearing was about cremation. And that was it. That was the beginning, the middle and the end for us. It was that not one of our brothers and sisters would be cremated, no matter what. It didn't matter to what extent we would have to work to, or it just didn't matter. It wasn't going to happen on our watch, inshallah. It was a fear, and it was a massive driving factor. It scared us and inspired us both at the same time. And that was it. You nailed it there. Yeah. That really, really kept us on our toes. It kept us, you didn't feel tired. No matter how long your days were, especially when we were setting up, because obviously we bought in a refrigerated container, because we've got 6 mortuary slots inside, which we knew wasn't going to be enough. So we had to bring in a refrigerated container which could hold a further 30. And the week where we were setting up for that, getting a hold of PPE, putting in risk assessments, in processes, signage, everything, getting the volunteers up to speed. Because a lot of our staff hadn't done a ghusl before. Yeah. So whereas we weren't doing the ghusl on the COVID patients, there were still people dying of other causes where we were doing the ghusls. So it was the steepest learning curve I think any of us could have, well, not imagined, because we didn't imagine this, but it was just such a steep curve.
And I think, one of the things that I noticed when I did come into the masjid and I spoke to the team, one of the things that was key was the fact that every decision that you made always boiled down to, we want to bury our dead with the honor and dignity that they deserved, whilst also maintaining safety. And I think, alhamdulillah, from what you're saying and all the measures that, mashallah, you and your team took, I think, alhamdulillah, that was achieved, and I think, the dignity aspect remained. But with you and the volunteers, didn't you feel that it was like a really large responsibility? Because your volunteers now, normally when a funeral occurs, there's multiple people involved. There's imams involved, there's family coming, there's bereavement counseling, there's so many different aspects that go on. But all of a sudden, it's fallen on you and a handful of volunteers. I mean, how did you guys sort of cope with that, with performing the ghusls, with counseling the families? I'm sure it must have been a challenge,
So we decided very early as a team. We sat down internally, and when we spoke to each other, we knew the size of the task in hand. That wasn't lost on any of us. But at the same time, we realised that the only way we're going to get through it is if we do make it a little bit more. We have to detach ourselves a bit from the reality of what the situation was. It would have been too easy to get lost in it. When you've got a day where 5 bodies are brought in, 4 are taken out for burial, there's crossover at the same time, it's easy to, we wouldn't have seen that in a month normally. Now you're seeing it day after day, and the days build up. I think the surreal nature of it kept us slightly apart from what was happening as well in that sense. Even though we knew what we were doing, we knew that our margin was 0% failure. You can't bury the wrong person. You can't turn up to the cemetery at the wrong time. There was no margin for error. So I think the fact that all these individual items were so important in their own right, it kept us on our toes. And in terms of what you said before, you saw the news, you read the news articles, people were going into the hospital, they were in there for 2 weeks, then they were passing away. Then we were picking them up. So their family, they've left, the family have probably seen them last when they've gone in an ambulance, or they've taken them and dropped them off. So every single person was my family member. It was my team's family member. It was the volunteers' family member. There was nobody on there who was just a name on a piece of paper. They became our family. That's why, if at times we were very protective over them, or if we did even more so, I'm not sure how it's possible, because we always defend the integrity and the dignity of the deceased at GLM, alhamdulillah. But even more so here, it meant even more because their family hadn't been with them. So now we would treat them exactly like they're our family. So dignity, integrity, honour, that's all that mattered.
Alhamdulillah. And, how were the families coping with this, in your interactions with the families?
So the way we split the management side and that, our interaction with the families was a lot less. We'd interact with the families when we got to for the burials at the graveyards. And even then it was a bit easier in the sense of, with the restrictions that were in place, it was usually about 7 family members. We had plenty of occasions where we would make up the extra family members, because whether the family were in lockdown or the individual didn't have much family or any family in an unfortunate case, then our volunteers, alhamdulillah, would turn up, and they were the family. We were the family on countless occasions. So it was very personal. It was very personal. Whereas I do say that we had to treat it, not as a business, but we had to treat it at arm's length to keep our focus. At the same time, each person meant something to us.
And one of the things that I noticed, and I think it was what one of your volunteers was mentioning it to me, was I think in 1 week, you buried someone who, mashallah, was very, very wealthy, and also you buried someone who had nothing to his name, and I don't think they had any family members, but the way the burial occurred was exactly the same. Same number of people, same van, I think, that took them to the graveyard. And, subhanAllah, it just goes to show that, for me, it doesn't matter what you have, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants everyone humble and wants everyone on the same level, we're all going to end up in the same place.
100%. Same 3 white sheets, same casket, same van, same burial ground. No difference between like you say, somebody who had nothing and died with nobody. And again, we were in attendance to pray the janazah, as opposed to somebody who was, alhamdulillah, very wealthy, no difference whatsoever in the end.
Alhamdulillah. It's really, really, really powerful. And just how have the volunteers themselves been finding it? Like they must be sharing stories with you or accounts of how it's affected them. Do you have anything to share on that?
There's been different things that have come back. You can see some have been moved at times.
Yeah.
When you're collecting bodies, it never did for some. It never did just become. They lost the ability to keep it at arm's length at times, and it did move them at times. Same with the burials. They'd come back. You'd see sometimes individuals who are a bit more upset, and rightly so. I think it's important not to always hide away your emotions, especially if you are an emotional person. And again, when I say a team, I can't stress it enough. I can't stress enough the volunteers and those who are internal have been one team. Looking after each other, supporting each other, working through it together. There's never been an occasion where there's been an individual, whether it's collections, burials, working here. There's never been a person who's been alone. Times we've been here midnight, 1 a.m. There's always been someone who stayed and helped out with the workload. So when you've got brothers like that who are helping you, everything's been easier in that sense.
And I think that's something that's really powerful. And I think why this operation worked is you have the efficiency and the process in place, which alhamdulillah, it's nailed down to a T. But then you've also got genuine volunteers who just want to volunteer for the sake of Allah. And I think when you pair that up, alhamdulillah, you have a very robust process. And I think another thing that I noticed was, a lot of your team, especially those that had more knowledge, were actually giving reminders as well to the family, and I think at the graveyard at times. So alhamdulillah, there was da'wah as well that was being given and reminders and people being comforted.
Yeah, 100%, because the ruling at the graveyards is, say for Handsworth, for example, it's 6 family members plus an imam. Yeah. A lot of family members weren't able to arrange an imam. A lot of imams are older and in isolation, etc. So we would send a couple of alhamdulillah, we were blessed to have a couple of younger brothers who are able to fulfill that duty. So they would go, they'd give a reminder to the family. And like you say, it's giving dawah. We've had a few revert brother and sisters who we buried, so it's an opportunity to give dawah to the family. And they've been blown away by the ritual of the burials, how the deceased are treated, the respect and love that goes into it. They were just amazed by it, alhamdulillah.
Brilliant. And then to finish off then, I remember, and again, one of the volunteers posted this on his Facebook, and we actually reused the post and posted it on the main GLM Facebook page. But he said, never in my life would I have imagined that at some point there's more dead bodies being stored in the masjid than there are people praying. I mean, how have you, because you're part of the operations team, how have you just felt like normally you're used to setting up for Jummah, setting up for Ramadan? Has it been different this year? Like what, like emotion? I mean, everyone knows there's less people, but emotionally for you, how does it feel?
Ramadan at Green Lane is an event. I don't know if anybody hasn't been, then they have to at some stage do their best to be a part of Ramadan at Green Lane. It's something else. I know a lot of people talk about Eid as obviously being part of Eid as well, alhamdulillah. It's an amazing day, but there's something different about Ramadan at Green Lane. And obviously coming back to work here at the end of last year, Ramadan's that's the showpiece on the calendar. That's the one that you look forward to more than anything. For me anyway, and I think for a lot of us especially those who work here, and a lot of congregation, everybody's talking about Ramadan at Green Lane, months in advance, as you know. So the first night was, that was very difficult. And I think, as much as having the numbers of deceased that we had here, I think I saw it on the team that night, and I think the team saw it on me. There's no point of trying to hide it. The first night of Ramadan, when normally you'd have Tarawih, you'd have probably Qari and Hassan leading, absolutely packed masajid, us not being able to get everybody in, fill in the car park, to all of a sudden there's, at Maghrib time, there's about 3 of us here. It was arguably one of the most difficult times as well for us here. And I think personally, when I say personally, I mean me and my team here, Ramadan's been difficult in that sense of not having the congregation here, not having the team here. I think we've always prided ourselves on being the people's masjid. And we've always done our best to go above and beyond, especially, I'll speak for operations. Operationally, we've always tried to accommodate the congregation in ways that maybe on paper we say we wouldn't, but we bend the rules for our congregation because genuinely we love our congregation. And from what I've seen so far, and I'm sure it will continue, and I'm sure they'll give more, that they've been very generous. At the time when the masjid's been closed and we haven't been able to facilitate their prayer and provide the services that we would have, I don't believe there's a single congregation member that doesn't believe that the second that we can, and the second that we can safely open our doors and return back to business as usual, that they won't be our priority again. They're our congregation after all.